have you ever been called a burden by the very person you raised? My name is Ramona Ellery, and 3 months ago, my son said those exact words to me, in front of his whole backyard. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sold my house, booked a cruise, and never looked back. But that's not where the real story begins. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. I still remember that day like it was painted in glass, clear, bright, no clouds to speak of. But I felt like I was sinking. Not fast. Not dramatically. Just slowly, as if the ground had started to let go of me and didn't care to tell me why. It was my grandson's birthday party. Gavin had decided to throw it in their backyard this year, balloons, foldable chairs, a rented bounce house, all that suburban circus. I'd baked a tray of lemon bars the night before, same recipe I'd used for Gavin's third-grade fundraiser. Funny the things we carry across decades, thinking they'll still mean something. I arrived early, too early, maybe, and Amber, his wife, greeted me with that practiced kind of smile, all tight lips and no teeth. She took the lemon bars without really looking at them and guided me toward the side table. We'll set them here. Kids probably won't touch them, but the adults might, she said, brushing past me like she was rearranging furniture. I stood there for a second, holding onto the edge of the table, wondering if I was in the way already. Gavin was in the corner fiddling with the grill, talking to some dads from his office. I waved. He gave me a nod. It used to be a hug. Used to be, he'd call me mama when no one was listening, just to be silly. Now it was a nod. I took a seat near the garden beds, away from the bounce house noise, pretending to admire the landscaping. Kids ran around, screaming and sticky with cake. Someone turned on pop music too loud for conversation. I sat there thinking, this is what people mean by celebration. Just noise wrapped in sugar. Then it happened. Someone, I can't remember who, asked Gavin if his mother lived nearby. Just a casual question over paper plates and bottled soda. And Gavin, with half a laugh, said loud enough for everyone to hear, yeah, she comes to everything. Every single thing. We've talked about it, right, Mom? You don't have to come to all these events. It's just, sometimes it's a lot. You being here is, well, kinda stressful. He laughed. So did a few others. Nervous, polite laughter, like a sitcom cue that nobody believed in. I didn't say anything. Just smiled like I hadn't really heard. I looked down at my hands, folded in my lap like I was praying not to cry. In truth, I wasn't even sure how I felt yet, embarrassed? Unwanted? Or just, confirmed? The worst part wasn't what he said. It was how comfortable he seemed saying it. Like he'd been holding it in and finally decided to let it out, trusting no one would disagree. I looked around. Amber was chatting with another mom, didn't glance my way. The kids didn't notice. Even my youngest granddaughter, who used to cling to my leg like I was her lighthouse, ran past me, eyes fixed on the cotton candy machine. No one looked back. I got up quietly and made myself useful. Picked up a few napkins, poured a cup of juice for a kid who spilled his. The kind of things mothers do when they want to disappear with dignity. The party wore on, and I left before the last balloon popped. Back home, the house was still. I kicked off my shoes, reached for the fridge, and saw the lemon bars untouched. Not even one square missing. I didn't feel angry. Just misplaced. On the counter was a framed photo of Gavin when he was 7, missing 2 front teeth, hugging my waist like I was his whole world. We'd taken that picture at the county fair. He'd won a goldfish and named it after me. That little boy used to think I hung the moon. Now I was a lot. Now I was stressful. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the lemon bars for a long while. Not thinking. Just letting the weight of it all settle into my bones. I used to believe that if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, I wouldn't be pushed away. That being easy to love meant being easy to overlook. Turns out, people leave you anyway. Even when you shrink yourself to fit. The days after the party blurred together like fog on a window. Gavin didn't call. Neither did Amber. No thank you text, no awkward apology, not even a half-hearted "hope you got home okay." Just silence. I kept waiting for something, an acknowledgement, a follow-up, anything that would let me believe he didn't really mean what he said. I told myself it was stress. Maybe he'd had a rough week. Maybe the grill wasn't lighting. Maybe he didn't mean to say it like that. I've always been good at giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt's long expired. Each morning, I opened the curtains like I always did, watching the same backyard I'd once filled with plastic pools and folding chairs for Gavin's own birthdays. There used to be color and chaos, now there was nothing but stillness. I'd make tea and sit by the window, hands wrapped around the mug like it was holding me up instead of the other way around. Once, I picked up my phone and typed out, "You didn't have to say it like that." Then erased it. Typed again, "You okay?" Then erased that, too. In the end, I just stared at the empty message field until the screen dimmed. It had been nearly a week when the phone rang. Not Gavin. Norma. Still alive, or did you melt into a tray of lemon bars? Her voice came through the line like a breeze slapping the curtains. Sharp, warm, familiar. I laughed, just a breath of it. Barely. "I'm picking you up. We're going to eat something greasy and bad for our cholesterol. Get dressed, or I'll drag you out in that old bathrobe with the duck pattern." We used to work together at Mabel's diner back when my joints still let me move without announcing it. Norma always had a way of cutting through the layers, like she knew what you were thinking before you did. She'd retired a few years ago, but we'd kept in touch, texts, birthday cards, Christmas coffee. I hadn't seen her in person in months. We ended up at Honey, a small cafe tucked off Main with mismatched chairs and the best pecan pie in Asheville. Norma slid into the booth like she owned it. She ordered 2 coffees without asking. "So," she said, watching me over the rim of her mug, "what happened?" I hesitated, then told her. "Not everything. Just enough." She didn't say "I'm sorry" or "that's awful." She leaned back and said, flat as day, "You raised a son who now talks to you like you're some broken appliance he needs to replace. That's not love. That's usage." I flinched, not because she was wrong, but because I'd been trying so hard not to name it. "He's just overwhelmed," I said quietly. "Work's been tough. The kids are still little. So are excuses," she snapped back. "But they grow big if you feed 'em long enough." I didn't know what to say, so I looked down at the sugar packets and fiddled with one until it tore. Norma softened her voice a little. "You're not crazy for being hurt. You're crazy if you stay hurt and don't do a damn thing about it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded brochure. Bright blue with a photo of a cruise ship and the words "Pacific Horizon Cruises, explore your second chapter." "I've been thinking," she said, waving it like a flag, "if I don't do something mildly irresponsible before I turn 70, I might as well start collecting ceramic cats and yelling at kids to get off the lawn." I laughed, truly this time. "You? On a cruise? Why not? I got one hip replaced and one that still negotiates." "That's enough." I shook my head, but something in me cracked open just a little. The idea of going somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't steeped in the expectations of motherhood or the quiet shame of being unwanted, it sounded like breathing again. We talked about other things, her neighbor who keeps parking too close, a documentary about mountain goats, the pie. But my mind kept circling back to that brochure, tucked next to her wallet like a promise she hadn't made yet. That night, after I got home, I took off my shoes at the door and stood in the hallway a long time. The house was quiet, like it had been waiting for me to realize something. I ran into Carol Mathers at the grocery store, somewhere between the eggs and the yogurt. We hadn't seen each other in a while, not since I stopped going to church. Back then, we used to sit 2 pews apart, nodding politely, mouthing the same hymns from worn-out bulletins. Her hair had gone fully white, and she was wearing those oversized beaded earrings she always joked were her little rebellion. "Ramona," she said, her voice warm and too loud for aisle 6. She pulled me into a hug before I could brace myself. "How's that handsome boy of yours? Still working at the dealership? And those sweet babies? You must be busy helping raise them. I bet they keep you young." I smiled because that's what you do when someone means well, even if their words cut sideways. "They're growing fast," I managed. Then I steered the conversation like a ship off course. "How's your granddaughter? Still in Georgia?" We talked another minute or two, mostly her talking, me nodding, but my thoughts had already left the store. I finished the rest of my shopping on autopilot. Paid without registering a single total. Drove home with the windows up and the radio off, the silence thick like fog. When I got in, I set the groceries down and checked my email. That's when I saw it, subject line, family expectations. Amber never wrote unless she needed something. The moment I saw her name, I knew it wouldn't be kind. The email was short. Barely 4 sentences. "We need to talk about boundaries, and your role in the kids' lives. It's been overwhelming lately. No hello? No thank you. Just a quiet eviction wrapped in polite vocabulary." I read it again. And again. Each time hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something softer. They didn't. Boundaries. Overwhelming. Words that sound reasonable until they're turned against you like a blade in a smile. My mind reached backward, to every last-minute babysitting favor, every pot of soup dropped off when they were sick, every costume stitched and snack packed and bedtime story read. The shoebox upstairs full of crayon-scribbled "I love you, Grandma" cards I kept even after they stopped coming. Had I become too much? Or had I simply stopped being convenient? I made a cup of tea just to hold something warm in my hands. It sat untouched as I stared out the window at a yard that used to echo with their laughter. Now it was just weeds and wind and memories I didn't ask to relive. That evening, Gavin called. I knew it was coming. Amber's email was always the opening act. His voice was careful, rehearsed. "Hey, Mom? Got a minute?" I told him I did, even though my chest said otherwise. "We've been talking," he said. "We, of course. Always we. And we think maybe it's time to start thinking about what's next for you." My grip on the phone tightened, but I stayed quiet. Let him finish. "I mean, the house is big. It's got to be a lot to keep up. Assisted housing might be a good fit. They've got meals, activities. You'd have people around. It could actually be easier. For everyone." There it was. That last part. Easier for everyone. That's how it always goes, wrap it in concern, serve it like kindness. I didn't argue. Didn't sob. Just let the words settle into the cracks between us like cold water in old wood. "I'll think about it," I said, soft and steady. And I did. But not in the way he imagined. Later that night, I wrapped myself in a blanket and stepped out into the backyard. The moon was high, half hidden behind drifting clouds. The wind whispered through the trees like an old friend with bad news. I sat there for a long while, thinking not about my house, but about my place in it, and in their lives. That's when I heard my mother's voice again. Not loud, not imagined, just there, like always when I needed her. There will come a time when your silence stops protecting others and starts killing you. I whispered it to myself, testing the weight of each word. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt true. The next morning, I didn't open the curtains. I didn't make tea. I went straight to the desk, turned on the laptop, and typed 5 words into the search bar. Cruises for seniors, solo travel. Just like that, something inside me stirred. Not a fire. Not a scream. The woman at Sunbury Realty had soft eyes and a sharper tone than I expected. Mid-50s, maybe, with pressed slacks and a coral blouse that looked like it had never seen sweat. She clicked her pen once, then again, and asked, "You're sure about this?" I nodded. As sure as I've been about anything in a long time. She paused, maybe expecting me to backtrack, to say I needed to sleep on it. But I didn't ask about comps or market trends or whether spring was a better time to sell. I just said, as is. No open house. No upgrades. I want it done clean. She tilted her head, a little more respect behind her eyes now. We can list it tomorrow. I'll have someone out Friday to take pictures. I'll be ready, I said, standing before she could offer coffee or small talk. Driving home, I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't need music for what came next. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a memory. My footsteps sounded louder than they used to. Or maybe the house had just grown quieter around me. The air held the faint scent of lemon cleaner and something older, like dust and time. I stood in the living room and looked around like a visitor. The crocheted throw on the armchair, the brass lamp with the crooked shade, the faded family portrait above the fireplace, each one seemed to murmur some version of "Are you really doing this?" I didn't answer them. I walked to the dining table, ran my hand over the smooth wood I'd sanded myself back in '92. The varnish still carried a faint ring where Gavin used to leave his sweating Kool-Aid cups, red stains always bleeding through napkins no matter how careful he swore he'd been. Then I opened the hallway closet. Inside were the usual suspects: tangled holiday lights, a bread machine I never liked, scarves I never learned to tie properly. In the back, 3 boxes labeled in thick black marker, Gavin, school. One was stuffed with glitter-glued snowflakes, another with spelling tests and 3rd grade book reports. I lifted the lid of the last one, half expecting something in me to crack. But I didn't crumble. I didn't even blink. I just closed the box again and slid it toward the donation pile. In the guest room, I found the framed photo from Gavin's wedding. I'd worn that pale blue dress, the one that made my hips look wider than they were. He looked so young in that photo, hopeful, a little pink in the cheeks. Amber's hand was looped through his arm, her smile tight like she was holding something in. I remembered her thanking me that day for everything, which I suppose meant footing most of the bill. I took the picture out of the frame and set it face down on the pile. Then, in the kitchen drawer, beneath takeout menus and dead pens, I found a birthday card from my granddaughter. She'd been 6. Inside, in pink crayon, it read, "I love Grandma more than cupcakes." There was a smiley face next to my name, missing one eye. The lines were crooked and perfect. I held it for a long moment. Not crying. Not smiling. Just letting the warmth of it pass through me before I tucked it into a small folder labeled Keep. That night, I called Norma. "You did what?" she coughed, choking mid-bite. "I sold the house." "You what?" "I signed the papers. They're listing it tomorrow." There was a long pause, then a sigh that somehow held more pride than pity. "I'm done waiting to be invited into my own life," I said quietly. "I don't want to spend the next decade holding my breath." "Well, damn," she said after a beat. "I just renewed my passport last week." That made me smile, really smile. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" I'm saying if you think I'm letting you sail off into your midlife rebellion unsupervised, you've lost your mind. We laughed like we used to on our 2 a.m. breaks at Mabel's diner, tired, off-key, just enough to feel human again. A few days later, we booked the cruise. 6 weeks with Pacific Horizon, twin beds in a modest stateroom, departing from Charleston. Panama. Belize. Cartagena. Names we used to dream over on pages of travel magazines left behind in waiting rooms. I sold the couch. Gave away the china. Handed the garden shears to Mrs. Ellis next door, who still believed I'd come back for her tomatoes one day. But this time, I let go of things without promising to return. The night before we left, I sat at my old writing desk. The house was nearly empty, echoing with a stillness that didn't ache. I pulled out a blank postcard and stared at it for a while, expecting regret to creep in. But nothing came. No fear. No second thoughts. Just truth. I wrote, slowly. Don't worry about me. I've finally stopped worrying about being a burden. I left it on the kitchen counter. No stamp. No address. Just the truth, left behind like a light turned off on purpose. The first morning on the ship, I stood alone on the upper deck while most passengers were still asleep or buried in breakfast buffets and excursion pamphlets. The air was soft but carried a chill, and the sun was rising in slow amber streaks across a sky that looked like it hadn't made up its mind yet. The sea stretched out forever, just one long, slow breath after another. No fences, no sidewalks, no mailboxes. Just water, moving to a rhythm that didn't care whether you were ready for it or not. I pulled my sweater tighter. It used to be Gavin's. He'd left it at my house years ago and never asked for it back. That morning, it felt like armor. There's a particular kind of silence you can only find out at sea. Not the silence of being ignored. Not the kind that comes after a slammed door or a passive-aggressive text. This silence was honest. It didn't try to fill itself or apologize for existing. It just was. And it asked, without words, now that no one else is talking, will you finally listen to yourself? I gripped the railing. My hands were cold. My knuckles stiff. You did it, I whispered. The words came out more question than victory. But what exactly had I done? Had I freed myself, or just cracked under pressure? Norma had gone off to find the yoga class they offered for active seniors. I'd told her I needed some air, but what I really needed was space. The kind of space where nobody expected me to refill snack cups or keep quiet for the sake of peace. And still, even with all this ocean between me and the life I'd walked away from, guilt clung to me like damp linen. What if I'd gone too far? Maybe Gavin had just snapped under stress. Maybe Amber didn't mean that email the way it sounded. Maybe I'd read too much into it. Or maybe I really had abandoned them. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. But I knew. My hands moved before my mind caught up. I pressed answer. Where the hell are you? Gavin's voice hit like a slap, sharp, panicked, and angry. The house is empty. You didn't tell anyone. Are you okay? There was a pause, one of those long silences where the other person waits for your voice to catch in your throat. But mine didn't. I'm okay, I said, calmly. I sold the house. Another beat. Then, louder, you just left? Like some teenager having a tantrum. That word, tantrum, caught fire somewhere deep in my chest. So that's what this looked like to him? Reclaiming my life, refusing to be a side character in my own story, and it was a tantrum? I didn't leave you, Gavin, I said, quiet but sure. I left the version of myself who accepted being treated like extra baggage. He didn't speak. I could hear his breathing, uneven, clipped. I imagined him standing in the kitchen where my note used to be, staring at an absence he hadn't seen coming. I tried, I continued. I babysat. I brought casseroles. I kept holidays from falling apart. But somewhere along the line, I stopped being a person to you. I became logistics. Mom, he started, but I didn't let him finish. This wasn't sudden. It was just silent. And silence doesn't mean nothing's wrong. I hung up. Not in anger, but to protect the clarity I'd found in that moment. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just stood there, the salt air brushing past me like wind through tall grass. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt real. I waited for the guilt to come crawling back. That old familiar pang in the gut that usually arrived after I asserted myself. But it didn't come. Just quiet. And something softer beneath it. Something like peace. Norma found me about 20 minutes later, a muffin in one hand and sunglasses pushed up like a crown on her head. Judging by your face, I missed a storm, she said, settling beside me. I talked to Gavin. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. He's confused. Probably angry. And you? I'm not, I said. And I meant it. She looked at me, her expression full of the kind of patience only someone who's been through their own storm can offer. You didn't run away, Ramona, she said, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. You stepped out. I didn't reply right away. Just nodded and kept looking out over the water, where the line between sky and sea blurred into one continuous possibility. There was a flyer taped to the wall outside the elevator on deck 5. Faded yellow paper with a watercolor border, curling a little at the edges from salt air and overuse. It read, "Circle Talk, Stories That Travel With Us." Norma squinted at it like it was a crossword puzzle. Sounds like a bunch of sentimental folks crying over bad marriages and dead cats, she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. Then came the wink. You're going. I'll be at trivia with the bartender who remembers my name and pours generously. I almost passed it by. Almost. But something in me felt tethered to those words, stories that travel with us. Maybe I'd been carrying mine long enough. The room was just off the ship's library, tucked behind sliding doors that didn't always catch. It smelled like old books and lemon hand wipes. The chairs were mismatched armchairs arranged in a loose, uneven circle. The kind of room where no one needed to be impressive. 15 of us, maybe 16 if you counted the man sleeping gently in the back. A collection of joints that creaked, cardigans pulled tight, hands wrapped around coffee cups like life rafts. The woman leading the session introduced herself as Lila. Barefoot, with short curls and the kind of soft voice that made you sit up straighter just to catch it. No pressure, she said, walking around the circle slowly. But if something's been sitting on your chest for too long, this is a good place to set it down. The first to speak was a woman with a lilac shawl draped around her shoulders like a memory. She talked about her daughter. How they hadn't spoken in 8 years. She says I smothered her, she whispered. Maybe I did. But I didn't know how to love smaller. Her words didn't hang, they landed. Right in the room's center, where everyone could feel the echo. Next was a man with a Tennessee accent and a wedding ring so worn it looked part of his skin. Lost my wife last Christmas, he said, barely above a murmur. Spent 6 months setting 2 plates at dinner by accident. No one gasped. No one gave speeches. The silence in that room was active. Present. Holding space like a second set of hands. I hadn't planned to speak. I'd told myself I was just observing. But then it was quiet again. And before I could stop myself, I heard my voice break the air. My son called me a burden, I said, not looking up. And I believed him. For far too long. I didn't dress it up. Didn't explain or soften the edges. I just let the truth sit out there, raw and real. For a beat, the room stayed still. Then a woman 2 chairs over leaned forward, not to console, not to pity, but to tell the truth. "You're not a burden," she said. "You're a woman who gave too much, for too long." She said it the way someone says the sky is blue. Not to convince you, but because it just is. I nodded, because it was the only thing I could do without falling apart. After the group disbanded, I didn't go looking for Norma. I walked alone to the ship's observation lounge and found a quiet chair by the window. The cruise map was printed on a glossy fold-out tucked into our welcome folder. I smoothed it open on my lap. Montego Bay. Cozumel. Cartagena. Little red dots lining the edges of the sea. Then, Beaufort, South Carolina. I didn't know much about Beaufort. I'd passed through once, years ago, on a road trip with my sister. I remembered porches. Spanish moss. The kind of quiet that feels earned. Norma found me like she always does, like a breeze that doesn't knock but still makes itself known. She handed me a tiny paper cup filled with vanilla ice cream. "2 spoons," she said. "Because I'm not a monster." We ate slowly, in the kind of silence that asks nothing of you. Then she said, almost like she wasn't asking, "What if you don't go back to Asheville?" I didn't answer at first. Just traced the route on the map again with my finger, stopping on Beaufort. "Maybe I'll start over there." She smirked. "You always were the quiet rebel." That night, back in the cabin, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Gavin. "I didn't mean to hurt you. But I don't understand why you're doing this to us." Us. Not you. Not me. Just us, as if my leaving disrupted some system he thought was running fine. As if I'd broken something, rather than taken back what was already mine. I stared at the message for a long while. I didn't cry. I didn't roll my eyes. I just sat with it. He wanted something that made sense in his story. But I was finally learning to write my own. So I deleted it. When the ship pulled into Charleston, the air shifted. It wasn't loud or rushed, just quiet in that particular way things get when people know something good is ending. Doors clicked softly, bags rolled along the hallway carpet, voices lowered out of respect for the mood. Norma and I packed in silence. Not the kind that comes from tension, more like reverence. Our cabin, once cluttered with damp towels and half-eaten fruit cups, now looked anonymous again. The clothes we folded smelled like sea air and unfamiliar places, the scent of a world that hadn't expected us but let us pass through anyway. At the dock, she hugged me harder than I expected. Her cheek rested against mine, her breath warm and steady. "We didn't run, Ramona," she murmured. "We just walked toward ourselves." My chin dipped against her shoulder. "Don't forget sunscreen in Ohio." She pulled back with a crooked smile. "Don't forget to send a postcard from wherever you land." I didn't tell her I wasn't planning on landing anywhere familiar. I'd arranged a rideshare, not back to my old house, but to a small cafe on the edge of downtown. Close enough to Gavin's office that he could walk, far enough from any street that held memory. I chose it on purpose. No creaky floorboards we'd once walked together, no family photos on the walls. Just 4 tables, a chalkboard menu, and the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. I arrived early. Sat by the window. Stirred cream into my cup without drinking it. My hands were steady, but my chest was doing that thing it does before a storm, tight, but expectant. Gavin arrived 5 minutes late. His hair was messier than usual, his shirt wrinkled at the collar like he'd tugged it too many times. He spotted me and gave a quick, uncertain wave. I didn't stand. Just nodded and watched him settle across from me like he was the one waiting for answers. He didn't order anything. Didn't even take off his jacket. You blindsided us, he said, skipping hello. The kids keep asking where you are. I kept my eyes on my coffee. They ask now? Funny. When I was there every week, no one even looked up from their screens. He stiffened. That's not fair. It's not meant to be fair, I said calmly. It's meant to be true. His hand went to his forehead, fingers pressing into his temple. A nervous tick left over from childhood, usually followed by excuses. You were always there, he muttered. Just, sometimes it felt like too much. I didn't blink. And you were never quite enough, I said gently. But I never said that, Gavin. Because love doesn't talk like that. He flinched, not visibly, but I saw it in the small shift of his shoulders. The way he suddenly looked smaller in his chair. I gave you everything I had, I continued. Not for applause. Just for connection. And somehow, I ended up as background noise. Something tolerated, not treasured. That's not what I meant, he mumbled, voice cracking slightly. Isn't it? I tilted my head, not accusing, just tired. You sent me an invitation to disappear. I just finally accepted it. He sat back, crossing his arms, but he didn't argue. Maybe he knew he couldn't. Maybe the words were still settling inside him. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old brass key, the one with the red plastic tag, scribbled in crayon, back door. His third-grade handwriting still faint beneath the years. This doesn't open anything anymore, I said, setting it on the table. But I thought you might need to hold it. To remember what you used to have. He stared at it like it was a relic, a fossil from a version of me he'd forgotten. I don't hate you, I said, voice soft. But I can't go back to being convenient. Not even for the sake of the kids. I stood. My knees popped audibly, aging doesn't wait for poetic timing, but I straightened, tall as I could. I'm heading to Beaufort, I said. Don't call out of guilt. Don't write unless you mean it. He looked up. Beaufort. I met his gaze one last time. If you ever learn how to talk to me like someone you love, not someone you manage, you'll know where to find me. And with that, I walked out. It's been just over 3 weeks since I came to Beaufort, and every morning still feels like I borrowed it from someone else's life. I rent a small one-bedroom cottage 2 blocks from the river. The paint's peeling near the porch steps, and the kitchen sink leaks when I forget to turn the knob just right, but it's mine. The quiet is a different kind than before. This one isn't lonely. It's chosen. Most mornings, I walk to Riverlight Cafe. It's run by a retired teacher named May who wears bright scarves and gives out extra blueberry muffins to anyone who looks like they need them. I sit by the window with my coffee and watch the tide change. Then I join a small group of women who gather near the marina to walk the loop trail. We don't talk about where we came from. Only where we're going, and what to cook for dinner when no one's coming over. I started keeping a journal again. I don't write about Gavin every day, or even every week. I write about the smell of salt when the tide comes in, or how the neighbor's cat insists on visiting my porch but never lets me pet him. I write about the sun. About stillness. About the strangeness of feeling safe with no one else in the room. A few nights ago, I opened the wooden box I'd kept sealed since Henry died. Inside were the letters he used to leave me, on the fridge, in lunch bags, sometimes on the dashboard of my car. I'd saved them all, tucked them away like time capsules of a love that never demanded proof. I read them aloud, one by one. And when I finished, I didn't cry. I just closed the box and placed it on the shelf like it finally belonged there. Yesterday, I got a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A letter. No return address, but the handwriting was his. I miss you. I don't know how to be your son anymore, but I'm trying to remember how. The kids drew you a picture. I didn't tell them what I said that day. Maybe one day I will. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't wrapped in redemption. But it was honest. The drawing was folded inside, a crayon-scribbled beach scene with a woman who looked vaguely like me, holding a cone of mint chocolate chip. The word Grandma floated above her in blocky, eager letters. I didn't hang it. Didn't tape it to the fridge or frame it. I just placed it gently on the kitchen table, right next to my mug, where I could see it and not have to do anything about it. Later that evening, I opened my journal and wrote. Some bridges don't need to be burned. But they do need to be rebuilt, with better wood, and a different architect. This morning, I sent Gavin a text. Just one line. Thank you for the drawing. I'm okay. I hope you're learning to be, too. No promises. No openings I wasn't ready for. Just the truth, on my terms. Afterward, I took my usual walk down to the sea. The sky was high and wide, the air soft against my skin. As I crossed the little wooden bridge that curves out over the marsh, I saw the group waiting ahead, Linda, June, and that new woman who joined us last Thursday. Linda called out, cupping her hands like a megaphone. We saved you a chair, Ramona. I smiled. Real, wide, rooted. I'm coming, I said, loud enough for them to hear. For real, this time. The breeze caught my hair and tossed it in every direction. I didn't smooth it down. I let it fly. Turns out, I wasn't a burden. I was just somewhere I was never meant to stay. You know, I never set out to change my life. I just wanted a little peace, a place where I didn't feel like I had to earn my right to be loved. And maybe, if you've ever felt like that too, then you know what I mean. Sometimes, it's not about running away. It's about finally walking toward yourself. Have you ever reached that moment, quiet, simple, when you realized it was time to choose you? If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. We've still got so many things to talk about, don't we?